What's up, Solo Cups? My name is Jon Solo, and it's not an exaggeration to say that you are watching History in the Making, because today you get to witness the first ever messed up interview. Probably not going to call them that officially, but that's just to make this transition seem as on brand as possible. So how is this episode different than other Messed Up Origins episodes? Well, like I already said, it's an interview. Pay attention, Derek. We cover all the info you'd expect us to in our weekly breakdowns of folklore and myth, with the major difference being that you're going to hear it through a conversation with someone a lot smarter than I am. Today, that someone is Jack Daly, the channel's go-to folklore expert who I've been working with for the past 4 years. The man is a PhD candidate, a scholar of supernatural legends and beliefs specializing in cryptids. In other words, he's an expert on the monsters living under your bed, hiding in your closet, and lurking just outside your bedroom window. As you're about to see, we talk about a ton of interesting shit this episode. How the study of folklore has evolved in recent years, the path Jack took to becoming a folklorist, and of course, what this episode's thumbnail and title are teasing, the Mothman. Is he an angel of death, a foreteller of doom, or just a bird that a complete idiot mistook as an interdimensional being? And I've gotta say, this conversation went better than I expected. Not because of anything I did, but because Jack is just that great a guest. Some of you might even say that he was a better interviewer than I was, and you'd be right. Prepare to be amazed at my ability to ramble indefinitely without ever getting to the point. Running the show behind the scenes is our lead editor, Dillon. But pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And the sponsor of today's episode is Squarespace, but more on them later. In the meantime, just sit back, relax, sacrifice those like and subscribe buttons to the all-powerful algorithm gods that determine whether or not I can afford to feed my child, and enjoy. All right, Jack Daly, welcome to the first interview of the Messed Up Origins podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Hell yeah. So for those who don't know, I might be repeating a few things that I said in the intro because I haven't recorded the intro yet. But Jack has been working for the Messed Up Origins series since, I think, 2022, right?
I think it was 2021. I'm pretty sure.
Maybe. Yeah, you know what? Maybe it was 2021. Yeah, you're right. And you've done the research on quite a few, like, of our big projects. Mm-hmm. A few that stand out to me is like Jack Frost, the Beldam, and with Coraline.
Yeah, we did Stingy Jack as well. Sort of the origin of jack-o'-lanterns. Zagreus, I think, was one of the myth ones that I did.
There you go.
Yeah, working on some of the Chinese astrology projects that we've got coming out as well.
Yeah. Jack's been leading the charge on all of the mythology research and astrology research, saving me an insane amount of time and just boiling it all down to the most interesting points. So today we're going to be talking about the Mothman, the legendary cryptid, the Mothman. But before we get too much into that, I do want to ask, move that back. I do want to ask Jack a little about his job, and because what is a folklorist, right? Like, how I grew up, did not think that this could have ever been an option for a job, or like a field of study. Out of all the majors that I, learned about on my way to college, folklore was not one of them. So I think for the people at home, what is your official job title, and how would you describe what you do?
Well, defining my official job title is kind of difficult because I have 3 jobs right now, actually. So for you, I mean, I'm a researcher, right? But I'm also a lecturer at the University of Colorado, Boulder, and an instructor at Front Range Community College. Oh, wow. So life as a folklorist typically takes one of 2 routes, either an academic route or a public folklore route, working in sort of like arts councils and within other humanities councils. But I'm typically more along the academic route. And yeah, it's funny that you mentioned not knowing that it's a major that you can really pursue. But it's the major of folklore is not offered in many universities, especially at the doctoral level, which I currently am a PhD candidate
Hell yeah.
in American Studies at Penn State, but it's in a program that has folklorists on staff and has kind of a long history of folklorists working there, stretching back to the 60s, basically.
Wow.
And so you might find yourself in other sort of departments as a folklorist in academia. But my master's degree is in folklore from Utah State University.
Oh,
And
nice.
there's more places where you can get master's degrees in folklore than there are PhDs in folklore. There's really only two in North America that you can get an actual PhD in folklore, which
Oh,
is
wow.
Indiana University and Memorial University.
Okay.
But still, sort of kind of on like a lower level, you can be a folklorist at a lot of different universities. So yeah, I didn't really realize that I was studying folklore until I decided to pursue my master's degree. But I was doing history and English and anthropology as an undergrad, and kind of that it's a bit of a mixture of those kind of disciplines. Folklore is,
Okay.
but yeah, folklore is it still is kind of defining itself. I think as a discipline, it's changing as new cultural processes kind of occur. The academic study of folklore is a little bit different than what most people think about as folklore, because I think we have a sort of broader definition of what folklore is as
Mm-hmm.
being sort of
Right.
expressive vernacular culture, as opposed to when people hear folklore, they think of it typically as just like legends or sort of, campfire stories, which that is part of folklore. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really what I study. I'm a scholar of legend and belief, and I study monsters and cryptids as the core of sort of what I research.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a number of different routes. And I mean, I think that really an avenue that there needs to be more folklorists doing is content creation.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, for me, like I think of you as a mythologist and a folklorist. I would classify you in this folklore sort of group. But I think
Well,
we
that I
need,
really appreciate.
yeah, I mean, but I think we need more people that have sort of training in being more public facing in as far as being a folklorist. So that's kind of one of the
Right.
missions that I have.
Going back to what you said about the public facing figures in folklore, like I that's one thing that it's so interesting to me because like YouTube allowed for people to just create content about whatever niche they're interested in, right? And like I could be wrong, but I almost feel like with only a few exceptions, like academia has kind of been a little dismissive or like scoffed at in the beginning, the idea of going on like influencer content creator podcasts, or even creating content in general and sticking to a more like rigid official format. Because I feel like you guys have a lot more. I mean, even just like writing a paper, for example, you have so many more channels to go through to get papers published and your information approved. And I know that like obviously a huge component of our channel is like maintaining the accuracy and not misleading people, not just filling in the blanks and misrepresenting theories as fact. And I can see why that would even be like a bit of a deterrent from professionals because, from professional folklorists is because you don't know always who you're going to be interviewing with. And like, there's there's just so much opportunity in these unofficial channels to misrepresent things, and there's even a lot of like personal benefit to doing that. Like I've seen so many podcasts. I think it's called the Jumper podcast, if I remember right, where they present all of these nursery rhyme theories that I've had you and our other researcher, our historian Meredith, look into as fact. It's like, did you know that the Muffin Man was a serial killer? Other guy's like, no way, tell me more. And it's like you can go on the internet and do 30 seconds of research to find out that this is completely fake. So I totally understand the skepticism in those early stages, but it also feels like a bit of a missed opportunity for some because there was so much less competition prior. And now it's like you need to have a certain presentation style and personality to succeed in creating educational content. Like so many people tell me like, oh, if you were my history teacher, I would have paid so much more attention or something like that. The reality is that unlike the regular everyday history teacher, they don't get to put 60 hours of preparation into one 20-minute spiel. But so I got to humble myself a little bit. But it totally is relatable where like I just remember being in school, and as someone who likes a lot of history now, I didn't know, like I didn't have a good history teacher until college. And at that point it was like I was already getting into my major. I wasn't going to pivot and suddenly latch onto like a master's program to get a history degree or anything like that. I was I just wanted to get the fuck out of college. I was doing YouTube at the time, so I wanted out.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it even in folklore, it's kind of a complicated history within the discipline of being sort of public facing. Because in the 50s, there's this kind of backlash against what they called popularizers. And this was sort of people who were mass producing these kind of collections of just like decontextualized folklore texts, and not
Yeah.
really presenting them with scholarly rigor, but they were massively, you know, important and influential. People were buying the
Right.
books, and so that's how they were sort of receiving folklore. But I think that we're starting to really push back against that. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that, a lot of what you said is true as far as sort of some of the things that are hard for academics to jump through in doing, you know, like YouTube content, for example, is knowing how much time it really goes in on the back end of doing that research and presenting
Right.
it well. And that's something that I see with some channels. I can't remember exactly what video I was watching the other day, but it was something, myth, folklore related. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I was like, I feel like they didn't do a lot of research for this though, and so I went to the Wikipedia page for whatever topic they were talking about, and it was just a point for point
Oh
copying of the
God, dude.
Wikipedia, and so
Come on.
uh, I mean
That's
that's one thing
brutal.
just on the back end for your channel, knowing like the rigor that we all go into for doing the research is
Right.
to a completely different standard than that, but it's a different skill set. Like it's a different audience that you're presenting for when you're doing scholarly
Exactly.
work, or when you're compared to when you're presenting it on YouTube. You have to make it
That's a very good
interesting.
point. Yeah. Like two completely different audiences. Like every time I make a piece of content, in my head I'm like I need to present this in a way so that someone coming across it for the first time can understand and we can build up to the like more complicated stuff, but so that the experts are also satisfied and hopefully able to take away something new from watching it as well.
Definitely. And but one thing I will say is that I have used your like short form content as sort of a template for doing my own, and that whenever
Oh,
I've
nice.
posted like on YouTube, it hasn't really I've had a hard time getting traction on YouTube. No offense to YouTube, but I have had better success with short form content, whether that is YouTube Shorts or TikToks. And
Right.
one thing I've been doing with my students is I've been giving them end of the semester assignments where they have to distill their research into a one
Oh,
minute
no
video,
way.
and uh, I show your TikToks and your YouTube Shorts as well as mine
Oh,
as
hell
giving
yeah.
them sort of a template for thinking about how you can sort of boil down this research into, you know, it's bare
Yeah.
bones in a way that's engaging and thinking about audience in that way too.
That's so cool. Yeah, I had no idea you were doing that. Yeah, like in the shorts are interesting too because I will say like it's like it's just kind of the nature of the beast, I guess. But there's so many times when like presenting complicated stuff in that short form is particularly challenging because like there is so much context that you want to get into that you just don't have time because the guppies are going to swim away. Like there's even like, this is like a really nuanced thing, but I did a video on times that, or a short on times where Hercules embarrassed Hades. And there's one where Hades, he comes up to the surface of the underworld to collect a queen's soul. The queen had, I can't remember her name, but she had given up her soul and so her husband could live. And then Hercules kind of shows up in the middle of this deal, finds out the queen's going to be taken away, and Hades appears. And Hercules is like, this is pretty fucked up, man. Like, I'm not going to let you take her. So then they have to wrestle. But there's a painting where Hercules is wrestling Thanatos, the personification of death. Mm-hmm. And I showed that while talking about Hercules wrestling Hades. So, but I couldn't explain the fact that, so I got two kinds of comments. I got ones that said, that's not Hades in the picture, that's Thanatos. Why are you misrepresenting this? And then I got, Hades didn't go up to collect souls. That's what Thanatos was for. What are you talking about?
It's like, that's why I had the picture. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, so you can see how most people would portray this scene, but I'm describing to you this particular version of the myth. I didn't have time to establish that it was this specific guy's version of the story, and that in most of them, you know, it is Thanatos, and so like, that's just a difference between short and long form, but paralleling that with academia and content creation, like it's, like you said, it's different types of audiences that have different standards and expectations for the information you're presenting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now, a quick word about our sponsor, Squarespace. Whether you have a business you're trying to get off the ground or a passion project you want to share with the world, you need a place to showcase it online. That's where our sponsor, Squarespace, comes in. Squarespace has revolutionized web design once again. You've all probably heard that they've made building a website incredibly easy with their award-winning templates and first-of-its-kind Fluid engine, which lets you drag and drop elements freely or snap them to a grid. But you may not have heard they just made it even easier thanks to their newest feature, Design Intelligence. Design Intelligence is Squarespace's new AI technology that taps into their 20 years of industry-leading experience. It allows anyone to create a beautiful custom website in minutes. All you gotta do is tell it what kind of business you're running and what colors you like, and it generates a site that is packed with all the essentials. From a digital storefront to sell your homemade goods, to a calendar where clients and customers can schedule appointments and reservations. To try Squarespace out for free, just go to squarespace.com/Jon Solo. Then, when you realize you love it, you can use code Jon Solo for 10% off your first purchase.
So I have a question for you to sort of flip the interviewer, because I think a lot of people who get into folklore and mythology, at least in academia, I've found there's there's something that got them into it in the first place. And so I'm interested for you, like, have you always been interested in these topics, or was there sort of like a rabbit hole that you went down to get interested in it?
You know, I could probably go on a tangent about that.
Yeah.
I was also going to ask you the same thing, but I've like always been really obsessive about whatever things that I like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. Like, I got really into the, not necessarily like the fandom aspect of it, but just the lore was always so interesting. And YouTube was like a place that like I was monetarily incentivized to nerd out on that stuff. I also realized, like, in the midst, this was kind of more in my cartoon conspiracy days, where I was like, you know, the Rugrats might be dead and stupid things like that. But I liked sharing with people, like, you know, hey, this thing that you've always known and thought about a certain way, like, what if you thought about it this crazy different way, you know? Mm-hmm. And with folklore in particular, like, it is obviously very connected to in mythology. It's connected to a lot of those big IPs that I mentioned. They source folklore and myth for inspiration. So it was like also an avenue to just explore those things that I loved even more. And I've slowly, over the process of like working with you in particular, and then Steven when he was working with us for a little while, just how
Shout out
deep
to Steven.
and layered. Yeah, shout out to Stephen Merrill. Uh, just how deep the rabbit hole of folklore goes and how many layers there are. Um, like even just like the idea that like Steven introduced me to of like, folklore and myth are kind of one and the same. Like there's a nuanced difference, but I might have it backwards, but I think folklore is the umbrella term and then
Yep,
mythology is
folklore is the
below it.
umbrella term. Mythology
Okay.
is, yeah, at least that's how a folklorist would classify it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like even that, I'm like that just changed my perspective on how to think about these things. And yeah, I've just loved being able to pass that on. There's certain aspects of folklore that I'm not as into. For some reason, like I don't give a shit about Bigfoot at all. Like
That's blasphemy.
I know, like it doesn't make sense, but like to me, I don't know if it's that I've grown up around it so much or I've just heard so many people say, this isn't legit. It was faked. It was all a hoax by one guy. Without doing enough personal research into it, I haven't found all of the interesting tidbits to start that hunger that I have for kind of some of these other subjects. And I mean, I've had you research other topics that I'm not particularly into, but then once we got into them, I was just like, man, this is so much more complicated and interesting than I ever thought.
Every time, it's always more complicated. I mean, the gargoyles one was one for me that I was like, wow, I had no idea that the history and the folklore and everything of gargoyles went this deep.
Right. That was the first one that came to my head too. It's just like how many like I've never even thought about gargoyles. I'm just like excuse me, just like they're statues, they're just a certain kind of statue. People make statues for things that they honor. And there was a Gothic period where gargoyles were popular. And I just attributed it to the Gothic era, I guess. And that was kind of it. But I definitely didn't consider that they would have a functional architectural purpose, let alone like that there was this whole component of, are these Christian demons? Are they pagan demons? Did Christianity just include these to make the pagans more comfortable with going to their churches and living in their society? So yeah, I feel like I've gotten to learn so much more about the world and all of these things that we kind of just take for granted. Like Sandman was another one where it's funny, like I spent my whole life with like every time someone mentioned the Sandman, I pictured a certain visual, and it was like the visual from the one storybook that I had as a kid. And I'm just like, how the Sandman looks in that book is how I always imagined him. And then, seeing that Rise of the Guardians movie changed it a little bit. And then we did the whole episode on the Sandman, and like now when I picture the Sandman, I just think of that horrible stop motion animation that's like haunting. I'm like, that's the guy. The Sandman is no longer this cute, friendly dude who visits kids at night and helps them sleep and dream. He will rip out your eyes and feed them to his children.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the big sort of new waves that's coming up in folklore studies is looking more at the way that folklore and mythology are implemented into popular culture, and sort of the way that they're interwoven within one another, which is I think kind of what you've been doing a lot on your channel. But
Right.
I mean, it's I get sort of the legacy of older folklore studies was kind of looking with skepticism towards the popular portrayal of folklore and mythology. But now I think we're starting to realize that they're much more like deeply connected than we previously had sort of
Right.
acknowledged.
It reminds me of that term, like, I didn't I haven't read the whole book. I read the introduction of it. Of fake lore,
Right.
where I feel like, that kind of clarified to me, because I've thought a lot over the past couple of years, especially when trying to retell stories and describe these cryptids and stuff. And like, say there's like something in the upcoming Kappa video that I said was that the women are, they get impregnated by the Kappa, and then a lot of the times they end up carrying it to full term, and the baby ends up getting killed. Now, the notes and the research didn't specifically say they often have to carry it to full term, but it said that when they do, the baby is killed. So it's like, where does fake lore start and folklore end? And that book, it kind of taught, I think it mentioned something like, once you're almost doing like a meta approach to it, like I am, where you're discussing it as a topic, like that's when or say it's a massive project that you're doing for profit, like a movie or a TV show, like that's when it's no longer folklore. But at the same time, it does shape the public perception of these creatures and these stories. And if somebody were to, say they watch the show and then they go back to the roots of folklore, where now they're sitting around a campfire telling people about this creature and kind of using the show as a bit of a reference, like, does that become folklore again? Or does it stay fake lore?
So fake
Like,
lore.
not saying you have to answer that question.
No.
But
That's kind of the big question. And fake lore was the term that Richard Dorson used, and that's kind of what I've been referencing, like the old kind of school approach to folklore. But the new term that is sort of gaining headway is the folkloresque, which was
right,
introduced
yes. Which is
by
the name of that book.
Michael Dillon Foster and Jeff Tolbert, and Dr. Tolbert is my dissertation chair, so I'm kind of in his intellectual
Nice.
lineage. But it's really sort of reshaped the way that we think about this. We wouldn't really think about it as where folklore starts and where fake lore starts, and where they end. I think the folkloresque is a more useful tool of thinking about the way that, again, there's a feedback loop that operates between them, and that we
Right.
don't have to look with skepticism towards whatever Disney or whoever it might be as using folklore for economic incentive,
Yeah, right.
because I don't think that there's really anything wrong with that. Dorson did see something inherently wrong with that, but
Okay.
I think we're past that. And I'm actually presenting at a Tolkien conference at the end of this month,
Oh, nice.
in
Where's
which
that at?
it's in Denver.
Okay.
So luckily I won't have to drive too far from it for it. But I looked at the ways that Tolkien implemented folklore mythology into his legendarium, and basically my argument is that he used folklore mythology to make arguments about what the study of folklore mythology should be. And so he
Okay.
was engaging with conversations with people like Andrew Lang and Max Weber, who were kind of people who he was in conversation with academically in his fiction. So, and it's kind of a unique way that he did that, but again, it's a useful sort of new way of looking at this.
Right. And because, yeah, it just makes it so much more relevant to people's lives, which is, what probably what they want. And, you don't realize, even just like, like people who don't give a shit about folklore at all still know of like the boogeyman, and might, tell their kids about, this random creepy monster that they may have heard about once. It really is like, it's just prolific. So yeah, I don't know. I could just, again, keep talking in circles, but it's interesting to see how it's evolved. And it feels cool to be on like more of the cutting edge side of folklore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I wish that there was more people that were capable. I mean, I think part of the issue is that you're so good at what you do, it's very difficult to do it to the standard that, a professional YouTuber does it. But
Right.
again, just in general, I think that it's the more sort of public facing folklore work, especially with like interesting folklore topics, not to, you know,
Yeah.
be against like foodways, but I feel like, legends are kind of, and myths are towards the more interesting side of
Yeah.
folklore. So
You said nothing against what?
well, I said nothing against foodways. I don't know why that was. This is another thing. Like the study of folklore is much more pervasive or expansive than I
Hmm.
think what people think of it is. So like
Yeah.
I,
So I've
I
never even
study
heard that.
legends and belief, but foodways, I don't know why that was the first thing that came to my mind. That's like the way that people use food culturally and as part of their own traditions. Like you
Oh,
can think
that's
of like,
cool.
whatever dishes you're eating at Thanksgiving or things like that. There's actually some interesting
Yeah.
foodways stuff going on with Mothman, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but
Dude, that is so fucking cool. It's like even like yeah, there's just so many like different avenues that this stuff can be pursued in. It's like, yeah, why for Thanksgiving dinner is it a turkey specifically? And then why is Easter ham? And like
exactly. Yeah.
maybe there's nothing to it, but like it it's a tradition, right? So traditions have to start somewhere. And yeah, like the fact that somebody could like it, and YouTube's just created like the internet's created such a great opportunity for people to look into this stuff and be incentivized to do it. But like, I could just see a YouTube video title, just like, why do we actually eat turkey on Thanksgiving? Or why does this culture have this specific kind of food?
Yeah,
Or
you know
what
what?
did
I
they,
take it back. I take it back. We need more. We need more of those videos.
right. It's funny though, like, cause I am right there with you. Where like, I'm not really a foodie. I have like the diet of a 9 year old. And so I'm like, that's part of the reason, like we're doing these Trova trips and, these international field trips. And I'm more like, I got a decent amount of people who want to go to Egypt, but I'm just like, dude, does Egypt have KFC and McDonald's? Because if not, I might be a little screwed,
Yeah,
you
can I
know?
have chicken nuggets, chicken tenders? If not, it's a
Right,
deal breaker.
exactly. So like that's one of those things where like somebody in the audience watching this might be like, you know, John, why don't you like pursue something on this? And maybe we could do like a one-off episode, but that's probably better for a more cooking oriented person who also likes folklore. So there's a niche for someone out there that probably, I don't know, maybe somebody's already doing it, but
Yeah, that's my
there's some
guy, Tom,
opportunity.
Dom Tartaglia. Dom,
Dom
if you're watching,
Tartaglia.
this is yeah. He wrote his. He has a PhD in folklore, and he's a food scholar. So he's
Oh,
the state
nice.
folklorist of Florida.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
A state folklorist?
yeah, yeah. So state folklorist is kind of more towards the like public uh
Mm-hmm.
folklore angle.
Technical issues interrupted everything. We were in the midst of you saying what sparked your love for the niche of folklore.
Yeah, so I think I was talking about the Monster Quest episode.
Yeah.
Um, I can't actually remember exactly what episode it was. I'm pretty sure it was a Bigfoot episode, but I just remember in that moment being like, this is opening up a whole new world for me.
Yeah.
The expanse of what is out there and what I might be interested in is just completely changed from that moment. And so yeah, I remember then being like, okay, this is kind of a transformative moment for me.
Yeah.
But moving like studying things from an academic perspective, it was actually so I was in a history class and I was researching the history of the British monarchy because I still was thinking in those terms of what history is of, you know, the leaders, presidents, monarchs, wars.
Right.
I didn't realize that history was everything that's ever happened, you know.
Yeah, so
And
true.
I was researching Queen Elizabeth, and I started reading about this guy John Dee, who was her court astrologer
Ah.
and was sort of your quintessential early modern sort of Renaissance mage or wizard. And he was
Okay.
this extremely, um, you know, weird and different figure. He was trying to communicate with angels with scrying mirrors. And it was in that moment that I realized that, like, what you could study historically, and I think about folklore as something that you can kind of study from a similar perspective, was again way wider and
Right.
much more expansive than I previously considered. And that's one thing that you learn is that there's scholarship on most topics.
Okay.
Like whatever it is that you want to look into, there's probably going to be at least something that's been written about it from a decent standard of rigor.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, I studied a lot of like the history of magic as an undergrad because I was a history major and an English major.
Okay.
But then, so I kind of implemented that sort of way of thinking, like that
Yeah.
mode of thought kind of into my approaches in folklore.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like the, to transition from like literal history, here's what people said and did, to like it like in the sense of like the mage and the astrology, it's like it goes a little bit beyond that into why was he doing that? Like what was the school of thought behind the guy who lived during this time, and what was he trying to accomplish, and what gave him the idea to start getting into this? Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's kind of this like alternate way of seeing the world almost that
Right.
has, I found, has permeated society and culture as far back as you want to go.
Yeah.
And so it's just a little bit more of like a mystical or magical way of looking at the world.
Right.
And I think that that's one thing that draws people just generally to folklore is that, and mythology, is that it is very, it's mysterious. It's interesting. It sort of fills you with like awe and wonder. And
Right.
it's just that chasing of that sort of feeling is kind of what is at the core of, I mean, as an academic, you do need to kind of put aside a little bit of that kind of mystic twinge to it, but
Mm-hmm.
it still is, I mean, if you're researching Mothman or Bigfoot, you are still in that world, whether you like it or not.
Right. Yeah. Even if you have to like try to ground it in reality as much as possible, there's no avoiding that mystical
Yep.
element. Yeah. Like you said, it's like awe and wonder inspiring. Like there's even like aspects of that with regular history where, I feel like you were mentioning the like world leaders and politics. It's like we all know, George Washington was the first president of the United States. We learned that he like was a leader during the Revolutionary War, but like George Washington was a bad motherfucker, to my understanding, and they don't elaborate on the like what makes him such a special person or what made him such a special person at the time, and that is what makes history interesting, at least to me. Like it's like it starts to get back into that lore aspect of, this is Aragorn, but real life, like this is a character. And, if you were going to read a fantasy book, it wouldn't just be about the literal events that happened, because that's the most boring way to present things. So I love that folklore is kind of like, it's based in that mystical element. Like it like you said, it's always going to have that, but it really gives you the opportunity to encourage people to wonder a little bit more and maybe pursue an avenue that's particularly interesting to them.
Well, there's actually a really interesting crossover between George Washington and Mothman.
Okay. So
And
that's
if we want to
perfect.
get into it, that might be kind of a good segue for us to get into it.
I think that's great. Now's a better time, or now's a great time.
Okay. So the crossover between George Washington and Mothman
Mm-hmm.
is that the name, so Mothman takes place in, for the most part, Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Okay.
And the name actually comes from uh, George Washington went out to survey the land
Mm.
that Point Pleasant is in, and when he went out there, he saw this is kind of a pleasant area, and so George Washington did survey the region that became, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the where Mothman is,
Oh, that's
centered out
awesome.
from.
Wow. Yeah, see? Never knew that. And that's that's great. Um yeah, I want to like establish for everybody that and for you that like I was considering doing some like a light Mothman research on like building up to this, but since I know especially with this first episode, the majority of people watching are going to be like messed up Origins fans and longtime watchers. So I thought it'd be cool like basically to go into this the way that we go into our research meetings where you've accumulated all this information and then I get to learn about it from you directly.
Yeah, no, I think that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Except this time I don't have to
Um,
take any notes about timelines or anything like that. So I can give full attention.
yeah, so I can just dispense everything that I know about the topic, which at this point I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp for
Yeah.
most things. Mothman.
Cause you've,
I always, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say you've been into the Mothman as a figure for a while now, right?
Yeah, so I'm one of the few folklorists that has peer-reviewed research published on Mothman.
Oh, cool.
Um,
What was
so I
the
have an
research?
article. Well, the research that I was looking into was the way that Mothman came to be commemorated and folklorized is sort of this term that I was working with over time.
Okay.
And so that's one thing that I think is as like a scholar of monsters and cryptids that you can one thing that's good to do is sort of chart the development and the change
Yeah.
and understand like what was happening, what forces were operating behind those. Um, and so yeah, there's not a whole lot of scholarship that's been published on Mothman.
Okay.
Um, Definitely to me the best work that's been done on it is by Ellie Haskin, she wrote her PhD dissertation on Mothman
Okay.
um, in folklore at Indiana University. And it hasn't been published yet. It's available through like IU's dissertation. This is the nerdy stuff I get into of finding sources, but it's a great text. Um, but then sort of some of the other academic work that's been published by it has been by like cultural geographers for the most part, because like geography and folklore and sort of the what's going on in Point Pleasant is at the core of it. So I always feel like I need to sort of ground my discussions in the sources,
Yeah.
and the legitimacy of those. But to give people just a basic idea of exactly what Mothman is, um, this is a cryptid, which is an unknown or unseen animal that often has sort of kind of monstrous forms to it that was being ostensibly sighted quite a bit during the years between 1966 and 1967 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Point Pleasant is a small town. Um, it's got about 5,000 people to it, and really most of what Mothman traces back to as a phenomena was a sighting that two couples had in Point Pleasant on the outskirts of town in 1966, the Scarberrys and the Millettes. And they saw this giant winged humanoid creature with glowing red eyes that was chasing them at extraordinary speeds. Um, and during that period between 1966 and 1967, there was quite a bit of sightings that were occurring in town. Originally, they were calling it the bird,
Okay.
but then newspapers started picking up on this story, and they termed it the Mothman. The Mason County Monster was another term that they used.
Mm.
Images of Batman were really prevalent at that time,
Oh
so it
wow.
kind of was a little bit inspired by that name Batman. The Scarberry Millettes, their sighting wasn't actually some would argue not the first sighting of
Mm.
Mothman. There was sightings a little bit previously before that, and there was also a dog that was abducted in town and uh, was found later on the side of the road. And some people made a connection between this dog being missing and taken and the appearance of Mothman. But really, the Scarborough and the Millettes, their encounter established what folklorists would call the primary features of
Mm.
Mothman. So again, this this winged humanoid with glowing red eyes flying at extraordinary speeds.
Yeah.
Um, the Mothman phenomena in Point Pleasant culminated with the Silver Bridge disaster,
Okay.
which was a terrible tragedy that occurred on the Silver Bridge, which connects Point Pleasant to neighboring Gallipolis, Ohio, in which there was a buildup of cars uh, on the bridge,
Mm.
sort of during rush hour after work, and both of the lights stopped working
Mm.
on both sides of the bridge, and it was old and kind of outdated, the bridge itself, and it collapsed, and 46 people died during
Oh, wow.
this Silver Bridge collapse.
Damn.
And so this sort of secondary and very important feature to the Mothman phenomena is this idea that Mothman is a curse or an omen of sort of some kind of disaster that's going to occur. And and one thing that people connect Mothman to is this legend of the curse of Chief Cornstalk.
Okay.
And so one thing that I think a lot of people don't probably know about with Mothman is the way it was connected to the American Revolution through this sort how the connection has been made really between Mothman and events that took place during the revolutionary period in Point Pleasant.
Mm.
And so what was going on was during the 1770s, there were colonists and prospectors that were going out to the Point Pleasant region to try and expand territory. One of which was Daniel Boone, the famous Daniel
Oh.
Boone, and who Daniel Boone's son actually died in a conflict with the local tribes
Oh,
that
no.
were in Point Pleasant at the time in 1774. Same time, uh, within the next year or so, there was this. Uh, it was called Lord Dunmore's War, and Lord Dunmore was um, a lord in Virginia who was trying to expand into the area of Point Pleasant. And the legend is that he, during this, well, when he went to Point Pleasant and they were getting into, fights and wars with the local tribes there, that this Chief Cornstalk offered himself as basically collateral
Mm.
to the colonists that were there. Um, and so there's a difference between the legend and the curse of Chief Cornstalk and what actually probably happened.
Okay.
And the legend is that they betrayed him and they killed him, and on his death, Chief Cornstalk put a curse on Point
Mm.
Pleasant and the land itself. And so that has been sort of retroactively connected to Mothman.
Yeah.
And Mothman as being a sort of a continuation of this sort of colonial legacy. Um, but what happened is recently the town found a playbook, like literally from a play that was put on at one of the elementary schools, I believe, in Point Pleasant that included this curse of Chief Cornstalk. So it's a much later sort of legend that was attached to Point Pleasant in the early 1900s that doesn't have any historical grounding. So
Okay.
like Chief Cornstalk wasn't betrayed. He was killed
Mm-hmm.
uh, by the colonists,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't seem that it happened in the way that it was presented, nor did he put a curse on it.
Okay.
Um, so that's an important sort of element of this sort of longer historiography that has been attached to the legend of Mothman and the curse that he's associated with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It kind of seems like my skeptical hat is on, and I'm just like it's funny that these things always end up getting connected retroactively. It's always like people in somewhat recent times, like I don't know how exactly it went down, but it seems to be like looking at these historical events and then seeing what they can potentially attribute and connect.
yeah, and even Mothman has been connected again retroactively to sightings of sort of like winged humanoids in other places
Mm,
previously, including like England, as far as England.
okay.
There's a lot of different. There's so much ground to cover with Mothman.
Yeah.
But another thing that's happening is that Mothman has now been reported as being sighted in different areas.
Okay. All in
And
like is it Pennsylvania you said? Or
so
West Virginia.
Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And so that's what Ellie Haskins' work looks at as Mothman as sort of like a migratory legend.
Okay.
A legend that has shifted and changed its sort of forms in different times and places.
Okay.
And so a few recent historical disasters have been associated with this legend of Mothman.
Oh no.
And so in 1978, there was a mine explosion in Germany that was associated with sightings of a giant winged creature.
Okay.
There were stories of Chernobyl, the disaster, as being associated with um, sightings of Mothman.
My
Those, according to Ellie Haskin, have been sort of debunked as being a fabrication.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, during 9/11, there's photos of a winged humanoid by the towers.
No.
And then in Minneapolis, there was a bridge collapse, another one where somebody said that they saw Mothman there. Mothman was associated with sightings in Chihuahua, Mexico during the 2009 H1N1 swine flu. And then as recently as in the Fukushima disaster of 2011. And so that's a sort of, again, thinking of like the core elements of Mothman.
Yeah.
The association with disaster is at the center of it.
Right. Like a variety of disasters. It's like I don't know what the timeline is on all of these, but it seems like he really diversified. He went from collapsing bridges to like biological warfare to nuclear, disasters. Like damn. Like I could it's like I guess it depends on the way that you think of him, because like as the way I think, like if you think of him in kind of a similar context as like Bigfoot, which is kind of what I've done, which is that he's like not necessarily a harbinger of doom per se, but like a literal, it's like when I just think of him as just a literal monster or like a creature, that seems kind of ridiculous. But expanding out from there and getting kind of like spiritual with it, it's kind of like, maybe this is like an angel of death situation or something where it's more of like a spiritual or, supernatural is obvious. I'm thinking like for something above supernatural, but below like a deity, somewhere in that
Okay,
realm.
absolutely. So we need to go back a little bit because
Okay.
I got a little bit ahead of myself in going towards these sort of contemporary disasters.
Okay.
But one huge thing that happened in the Mothman phenomena was the publication of a book called The Mothman Prophecies
Okay.
in 1975 by a man named John Keel. Now, John Keel was what is called a Fortean researcher. And Forteanism is an area of study that was named after Charles Fort, who was this guy who was interested in all things supernatural, paranormal, preternatural, all of those things wrapped into one is what Forteanism is.
Oh.
I have a good definition here. Forteanism seeks to locate data and, in doing so, to question the manner in which truths are constructed through the articulation of explanatory narratives. So
Wow.
Fordianism tries to like kind of interrogate consensus reality and
Yeah.
look for the cracks in between. And so Keel was there in Point Pleasant during the Mothman sighting
Mm.
between 1966 and 1967. But he was researching, even prior to that, an assemblage of sort of paranormal topics like UFOs, and he classified Mothman as an ultra terrestrial. So when you were
Oh.
sort of looking for this sort of terminology,
Yeah.
Mothman was connected to a much like deeper sort of paranormal cosmology almost.
Yeah.
And his book, The Mothman Prophecies, it's not really about Mothman. It's kind of strange, but there's only one chapter that's really dedicated to Mothman. And instead, it really focuses on a wide range of other sort of supernatural things that were happening in Point Pleasant at the time.
Hmm.
UFO sightings. Um, One of the most memorable centers around a man named Woodrow Derenberger, who he details in the book Keel. Derenberger being stopped in the middle of the highway. I mean, or maybe it wasn't the highway, but on the road by a landed UFO craft,
Oh, wow.
uh, in which a strange individual named Indrid Cold came out of it and started basically delivering telepathic messages to this man. And during Keel's time in Point Pleasant, he was getting strange phone calls, and he, at least according to him, was getting sort of these prophecies that were delivered to him of the Pope being assassinated, and that there was going to be an inevitable disaster taking place in Point Pleasant.
Okay.
Um, but it kind of reads as sort of a chaotic, almost descent into paranoia. Um, and seeing almost what it's a very interesting book, and I don't want to like disparage John Keel.
No, but I just love
Um,
that description.
but yeah, he saw all of these sort of paranormal and supernatural things as being combined and interrelated.
Okay. So that's a book that came out in 1975. It looks like there's a movie
Yep.
that came out in 2002. I have no idea if it's got a
Yep.
50% on Rotten Tomatoes, so flip a coin. You might like it.
I really like the movie.
Okay.
Richard Gere is the star of the movie,
Okay.
and he plays basically the role of John Keel. It's based off of the book. They take some liberties and they change some things, but the theme of the movie is like what happens to a sane person when they're presented with the inexplicable,
Ah, that's
which that's
cool.
what happens to this journalist in the movie. But so the movie itself was sort of another huge development in the story of Mothman, the Mothman phenomena.
Yeah.
Because what happened then was there was an establishment of the Mothman Festival, and the creation of the museum in Mothman. And the town started sort of seeing a way to capitalize on the popularity of the legend.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really complicated thing with Point Pleasant in particular because, West Virginia has this kind of history of exploitation and of being viewed in a certain way. And it's a delicate thing for me to like approach because I'm not from West Virginia. I'm from Colorado. It's a totally different sort of culture. I'm not an insider
Right.
to their town and the culture itself, which that's something that folklorists really have to be attentive to is like the dynamics
Yeah.
of at play there.
That's one thing that I found like pretty interesting reading about the reading about like Native American cryptids in general is that I don't know if cryptid would be the right word, but like skinwalkers and wendigos, it's like the a lot of the times the books are written by like white guys who lived near the Native Americans. Um, at least in the most recent version of this that I covered, and I can see people on the internet, especially the real sensitive ones, saying like, you know, who is he to be sharing all of this? What does he actually know? When you look into the context, it's like, okay, this guy grew up in this area. He like bonded with the Native Americans, and they were, you know, they were fully aware of telling him these stories and that he was going to take this information and share it with people. But it's like you do need to have that trusted insider aspect if you want to talk about this stuff publicly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was thinking about writing my dissertation about the Mothman Festival.
Okay.
Actually, before I jump into that, I should have done some better self-promotion earlier because I have a book coming out next month.
Okay.
It's called Erie, Colorado.
Nice. Erie, Colorado.
Mountain Folklore, Monsters, and Tales of the Supernatural. It's available to pre-order on Amazon. But what I was going to say is that people, when I tell them about it, they ask me about if I include Native American folklore in it. And I'm like, no, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel that it's kind of my place to do that.
Right. Like you have to compile the work of guys who have already done that, basically.
So I was considering writing my dissertation about the Mothman Festival, but I chose not to for kind of those exact reasons, and the fact that I was in Pennsylvania and then I moved back to Colorado, and so I'm just very far away from it. But yeah. I do want to talk about the festival a little bit because it's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm super curious about that because it seems like a lot of fun, to be honest. I'd love to go, but I've also I've never been in an environment or attended an event like that. So I would just have no idea what to expect.
Yeah. So I went there in, I think it was, 2022. And I was taking a class about festivals and fads and fashion. It was a really interesting class. And I was very interested in the concepts and the ideas that we were learning there. And I was like, I'm going to go out to the Mothman Festival.
Yeah.
And check this out. So the festival itself, or like broad term festival, there's this interesting concept called the carnivalesque, which was developed by this Russian scholar, Mikhail Bakhtin, back in the 80s. And he said that the carnivalesque, it's named after Carnival, which is this pre-Lenten festival, is a time where you can have all of these sort of symbolic inversions in which time and space is sort of suspended and plunged into this liminal zone where things are operating differently. The hierarchy of whatever town might be turned upside down.
Yeah.
Everything is flipped on its head. It's kind of what's going on in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, actually. There's a lot of those carnivalesque elements there.
Yeah, but not to cut you off, but I can't remember the particular event because we've talked about a few of them, but there was an occasion in ancient Greece as well where all of the slaves were just for like a duration of a few days to a week, just they were treated like regular citizens, pampered. Their masters were gave them gifts and stuff like that. Like if masters had a lot of excess wealth, they would share it with the slaves. Especially like material possessions. So it's cool to see that that's continued in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's continued. But during the 20th century, a lot of holidays and festivals had a pretty dramatic shift that happened in which during, Saturnalia or whatever big festival where these things might be occurring, they're right in the center of town. They're outside. Mm-hmm. They're very public gatherings, but we sort of turned things and brought them inside.
Yeah.
And made them more like childlike. But what happens at the Mothman Festival is that we kind of have this going back to Saturnalia or to Carnival itself.
That's
in
so
which
cool.
It's outside, it's adult oriented.
Mm-hmm.
There's kids there too, but there's an adult element to play. I do think that again, there's a liminal aspect to it where things are operating differently. You're exploring the possibility of the existence of this monster. And the
Right.
most interesting change that occurs is that at the center of all of it is this statue of Mothman, this giant statue.
Yeah.
He's got abs, he's ripped, and it's almost like the monster has become the god of the festival. So it's this weird thing of like we're deifying the monster itself.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Oh man. I don't want to like um pivot too hard or like go off on a too much of a segue, but like have all of the portrayals, like is that basically the consistent way, maybe without the six pack abs, or the what looks like an eight pack abs? Is that kind of consistent with how he's always been shown? Because like
yeah,
my one idea of Mothman is like from Fallout 76, which was in West Virginia. Um,
mhm.
but he's very, I think that one leans a little bit more into just like he's a giant bug versus having this humanoid element.
Yeah, I think that it's a fairly accurate portrayal. Obviously, they did take some liberties in making it more muscular.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, the descriptions of him from the sightings
Mm.
include those elements of having giant wings, being sort of vaguely humanoid, having these red hypnotic eyes. Obviously, that statue is metal, so it's
Yeah.
silver. Typically portrayed as being like black fur, brown fur, some kind of dark fur.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think a fairly accurate image of Mothman.
Okay. Cool. I need to like change the archetypal version of him in my head, like I did with the Sandman, to because like I literally the I don't know if you saw the community post that I did, but I just used a picture of him from Fallout, and as I'm pulling it up now, looking over here, he's literally just a giant moth, which is probably the least interesting way they could have presented him, honestly. But that game was not finished when it came out anyway. But that's another topic. That's probably why they could have done better.
Yeah, I mean, there's some discrepancies in the ways that he's described.
Yeah, but like Moth Man, should be a hybrid.
Right.
But anyway, the festival.
But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say about the festival. Is
It's
it's kind of this
What are some things that you do
interesting.
at the Mothman Festival?
Well, it's really about consumption at its core.
Nice, like any
It's
good
kind of like
festival.
Disneyland a little bit.
Okay.
Like there's these long lines. I mean, there's a number of different things that you can do. You can attend uh lectures or talks. I didn't really go to those because there are really long lines for it.
Mm.
There's celebrities that are there from paranormal TV shows.
Oh, cool.
um MetaZoo had a booth when I was there. They don't exist anymore, but they're kind of like a trading card company.
Oh, nice.
There's food, there's drinks. One thing that you can do, which I didn't do, I wish I would have, was to go on a tour of the TNT area, which is this area sort of on the outskirts of town that is associated with Mothman sightings. Like John Keel went out there to investigate. It's a decommissioned military munitions
Oh,
plant,
wow.
basically. And so, yeah, people will go on legend trips out there
That's
to try
cool.
and find existence of Mothman.
Yeah, just
I
see.
think it's
Maybe
like,
he'll show up this time.
yeah,
That's one thing that I find interesting too. And like it's, if he is this ultra terrestrial type character, then he doesn't necessarily even exist on the material plane of existence that we do. But I do wonder, like with some of the more literal cryptids, like where are they hiding in between these sightings? It's like where would the Mothman be hanging out?
that's really the question, and I think that that's why a lot of like cryptozoologists will make the jump towards associating Bigfoot or Mothman with being, extra dimensional or ultra dimensional or aliens or
Yeah.
living on some other sphere of reality.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, like there is that a bit of a supernatural element to him in Fallout, where he just can kind of appear in the middle out of nowhere. And if I don't know if my experience is indicative of what the intent was, but basically you try to kill him, you try to take him out, and then he will probably disappear before you can actually get, deplete his health. But yeah, like just that little component was incorporated.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of differentiates a folklorist from being a Fortean scholar, like, or a Forteanist like John Keel, or being a cryptozoologist, is like, we're not really interested in whether Mothman is real or not.
Yeah.
Like, reality is such a difficult thing to come to grasps with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not really the thing that we're doing. I'm not trying to prove or disprove Mothman,
Right.
which, like, that's what skeptics are doing. I think the real thing, the best thing is to sort of, look at it as a process and analyze the behavior and the movement of the legend throughout society.
Right.
And with not starting from an assumption that it isn't real.
Mm-hmm. Just being open-minded.
A lot of the core of, I think, at least legend scholarship for me is based off of really that there's this guy, David Hufford, who did this great work in the 80s about the old hag and sleep paralysis, and saying these beliefs are rooted in actual experiences that are being interpreted rationally.
Totally.
So with Mothman, they're having the Scarberries and the Millettes had an experience.
Right. There was something going on that night, clearly, whether it was the Mothman or not.
Right.
Right. And yeah, I think honestly, like, probably that shift that you described in mindset, in the way to look at these things, would probably get me more into the idea of Bigfoot. It's like, I know there's some people who really do think Bigfoot exists, and that's totally fine. And like, maybe he's like a earlier evolution of humans that managed to linger around. But the fact, just the obsession around him, in like, that is, like you said, like, that's the folklore angle. Why do people care so much about this creature that, may or may not exist? But yeah, like, what sparked that passion, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm going to be writing my dissertation a lot about Bigfoot in particular, so hopefully I have some answers to some of those questions.
Okay, yeah.
By the end.
We'll do another one of these when you finish your dissertation on him.
Yeah, and I mean,
and
all of these
book,
topics
of course,
are so multifaceted and complex.
Right.
So there isn't usually one overarching answer. There's so many different ways.
Yeah, that's what makes even presenting the subjects in videos, like, somewhat difficult, is like, especially when I'm talking about another culture, it's like, I don't want to go into this skeptical. I know, like, in the case of Kappas, I know it sounds ridiculous to say that, like, an amphibious turtle man that's the size of a preteen has magical bowl of water in his head and all of that. But like you said, it had to come from something, and the way that I present it is like, I kind of talk about it as if it's real, but still try to clarify, like, the legend says this, or according to the myths, but not to just completely discredit it either, because, you can just point to, it's not really the same, but you can point to the ocean and how much of that's unexplored that we don't know about, like, and getting into the nature of reality, like, there could be two different realities to this conversation, where I walk away feeling like it was a great one and you walk away feeling like it was a complete waste of time. So what is the objective reality? And maybe there's certain people, and this is leaning more into the woo-woo, but that are a little more tuned into that supernatural realm, I guess. Like, I don't mean to fixate too much on whether he's real or not, but just the like you said, the perception of him being real or not is interesting.
Yeah, no, and I think looking at if he's real or not, or if cryptids are real, I think is asking kind of the wrong question.
Yeah.
Me. And they, like it's typically cryptozoologists and skeptics getting into these huge battles.
And then the folklorists are chilling on the side.
We're just like, yeah, you guys can take a sort of middle position. You know that, right?
Right. I think that's what that has played a huge influence on just like my outlook of a lot of things. It's like I grew up having a lot of opinions, and I still do have a lot of opinions, but having like being so in touch with this particular realm and kind of, making a living off of it, you have to open yourself up. And yeah, it's just cool, the influence that's played, and like that it can play on people.
I totally agree. Another thing that I want to cover in regard to Mothman is the Chicagoland Mothman.
Oh
Um,
shit.
this
I
is
did not know that
this
existed.
Mothman's real close to you, John.
Oh man. Okay.
You better look out. Um, so starting in 2017, there was
Oh,
a flood of sightings that started being reported out of the Chicago area and specifically Lake Michigan
okay.
of Mothman, or of again a giant winged humanoid. Apparently, these types of sightings date back to the 1950s.
Okay.
Um, but so again, we have sort of like uh, what Eleanor Haskin calls the restabilization process. So
Oh,
it's moved. The Mothman legend has moved through, personal narratives and sightings of something. Um, it's a little bit different. It's the same in these primary features of being giant and having wings and having sort of red eyes, but typically these Lake Michigan or Chicagoland Mothmans are described as being sighted during dusk,
okay.
um, and near water in
Mm.
particular.
Hmm.
And also inciting sort of a sense of fear or dread amongst the people that sight them for the most part. The one main difference is that there hasn't been a disaster associated with the Chicagoland Mothman yet.
Ah. Besides just
Um,
the disaster that is Chicago.
that's maybe it's just Chicago.
Yeah, it's just the general slow decay of Chicago over the past decade.
Um, and yeah, so that also, some of the people that are doing research on that from a non-scholarly perspective are, their names are Emily and Tobias Wayland, who are, they're Forteanists. So they're sort of
Okay.
carrying on this tradition of Keel and Charles Fort and doing sort of, good like field work, honestly, of interviewing people and talking about them and documenting the experiences. But yeah, it's been cited by the O'Hare Airport as well.
No way. Ah, dude, I hope it's
Um,
I'm just like, man, I'm flying out of there soon. I hope he stays perfectly clear of the airport. I need to get back.
yeah, so you're
Uh
honestly in some real danger out there in Chicago. You have to be careful.
that's hilarious. I can't believe that. I'm surprised that I haven't heard that he's moved along to this area. It's just so ingrained in West Virginia in my head.
I don't think it's reached the like inflection point where the necessary whatever it is, like news article or TV episode, or because that's
Right.
kind of how it works with a lot of cryptids and legends. That's how it worked with Mothman, is that, it took off in the newspapers,
Okay.
right? And so for the Chicago Mothman, I don't think it's had that sort of um, critical thing to expand the much broader public awareness of it being, cited and part of this emergent sort of legend cycle in Chicago right now.
Totally. Yeah, it needs like a catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, and like not to bring it back, but it leans it connects back to the whole folklore or pop culture adaptations of these things. It's like there needs to be a way, there needs to be something that gets it in the public eye, and like maybe in some, uh, like thinking about Wendigos, for example, like that was a spiritual belief, but that was a real phenomenon that a multitude of people experienced during those hungry times, where it perpetuated this legend about what would happen to you if you ate human meat. So yeah, just I don't know. I always start a sentence, then I don't know where I'm going with it, but it
That's
reminds
how
me
I
of
am too.
that.
That happens all the time when I'm teaching. I'm like, I have an idea of what I want to start with, and
Right.
then I don't know where it's going to end up with.
That's why scripting things out for these videos is so helpful. It's like I can always I can start the next idea, and then I spend I don't know how long finishing the sentence and then going back and redoing the way the sentence started. I'm like, well, that doesn't really fit, so I got to redo this, and it's funny how that works.
No, that's kind of that's the issue of deciding if you're going to script everything or if you're just going to go,
Right.
you know, off the cuff.
Yeah, and like I've been a little bit even like nervous in the past, not so much now, but more so in the early days of me covering folklore and stuff. I just didn't feel like I had enough even like general knowledge on the topic to like keep up in a conversation, where that's it's changed now. But I'm like, man, when people see how dumb I am when I don't have all of my points scripted out and well thought out, like it's going to change my public perception. But whatever. It happens to everybody.
It does. Well, you're a master script writer, so I think it's
Thank
all
you.
right.
I try,
But yeah,
man.
I think that covers pretty much everything with Mothman. I mean, um, I think we've hit on all of the main points. I am excited with the Chicago Mothman of opening up new potentials
Yeah,
for this as being something that's going to continue to develop.
that's cool. Yeah, because like it's the fact that the legend even started as recently as like the 1960s. That's pretty recent in terms of folklore age. So like
Yeah.
there's a lot of room for it to grow. And the fact that there's even something happening, it's just cool that anything is continuing to develop in the world of folklore in the modern day, considering all of the technology and skepticism that we have.
Right. Well, that was one of the fears that early folklorists had, was that basically rationalism and science and empiricism were just going to get rid of folklore and
Yeah.
of these ways, just folklore knowledge just in general.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that didn't happen.
No,
Um,
I
and that's the big change that happened in folklore studies, was like, we need to look at things as being emergent and dynamic,
right.
not just as things that people believed in the 1800s and the rural countryside.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I feel like I could be wrong. I feel like maybe there was a lull point in the world of folklore where things like people like you could even see it just if like a kind of a parallel in the religious spiritual world where people are just like less religious now than they ever have been. But there's also on the flip side of that, there seems to be a real hunger and craving for this kind of thing in this world. Like I saw a quote one time, and it's kind of like an angsty teen quote, but it's like in a society that has like answered every question, the only question left to answer is like what would happen if the society were destroyed or something like that. Um,
Okay.
yeah, taking it to like an
Yeah.
anarchic point, but
Uh-huh.
it 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 does leave you. It just reminds me of like what do we have left to wonder about? You know, I feel like a lot of people, like especially in the modern day, we didn't get in on the ground floor of almost anything. Like there was a big tech boom in the early 2000s, and like that's continuing to develop. There's a pretty giant gap in how to get involved in that. You need millions of dollars of disposable income. Um, so yeah, there's just like I don't know. I had a point, but it's gone now.
No, I think I was following the train of thought. I mean, we need to have new we need to have new legends, honestly.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
think that technology is actually going to create more of those
Mm-hmm.
and open up new avenues for discovery instead of like getting rid of them.
Right. Like I'm even thinking about like this just thought just popped into my head, but like creepy pastas. Like
Exactly.
a lot of the like I could be wrong, but a lot of the creepy pastas that I've encountered or come across are like it's like always a humanoid type thing that is causing the creepiness. And I feel like that's almost like a middle ground between the supernatural, but it's it's human-ish. So it's not you're not branching off into this like human with wings per se, but instead it's just like a lady with a stretched out face or the creepy guy in a suit who follows people home. Like
Yeah, I
Slender
mean,
Man, you know, he's a
Slenderman.
little more
Yeah.
human.
And shout out to my dissertation chair, Jeff Tolbert, because he's the Slenderman expert,
Oh no way.
uh,
Hell yeah.
as well as Lynn McNeil was my master's thesis chair, and Trevor Blank, who was in my, who came from my same PhD program. They have a whole book on Slenderman,
Oh no way.
and it's fantastic. Yeah, we have this sort of proclivity to anthropomorphize nature and monsters in particular. Like that's one of the big ideas in looking at monsters is that they are sort of us in a way. Like
Right.
we are embodying something onto them or projecting something onto them in a
Yeah.
certain sense. And so once you think about them, most monsters are human in figure for the most part. I mean, some of them aren't,
Yeah. No, you're
but a
right.
lot of them.
A lot of them are. It's like, and that's kind of what makes them so scary, I guess. Is like they're
Exactly.
like us, but they're not quite. It's so interesting, like the way the human brain works, because I'm even thinking of like Monsters Inc. And the monsters
Yeah.
in there, they're all crazy looking monsters, but they all, for the most part, they got arms and legs and eyes, and it's a movie. Humans have to understand it, so there has to be a human element to it. But we definitely we're just like projecting our society and our feelings and onto these fictional creatures.
Yeah, and I love Monsters Inc. for just kind of the way that it's just picking apart like corporate culture at its core.
Yeah, right.
You know?
That's so true. Yeah, it's funny how it does it. God, Pixar's amazing. The fact that they can do that while also telling a story about monsters in your closet,
Right.
and and even that, like, it's. I feel like that could fall under the folklore esque of
Absolutely.
before Monsters Inc. That's why Monsters Inc. exists, is because kids were afraid of monsters in the closet and under the bed and such, and then this just expanded on that.
So I have one final question for you,
Okay.
which is if you were to like write a thesis or have your own like big capstone academic project,
Mm,
like say just for the sake of argument, you were in like a graduate program for folklore,
okay.
what would be your like main project?
Man, that's a good question. I feel like I don't know if this would even qualify, but one thing that I was working on with Steven that we never got to the end point with, but that I still want to, is the the like a pet monster archetype, which he according to him, he had a pretty hard time finding anything official that describes that. But there is like a certain subsect of stories where there's a hero, there's some sort of supernatural presence lurking on the outside of wherever they live, and everybody fears the supernatural presence. And then the hero comes into contact with it, and turns out it's not as threatening as they once thought.
Mm,
And that goes from like, there's a story called The Reluctant Dragon, where I think that's based on an even older story, but uh, it's about a dragon supposedly threatening this town. They get this brave knight to try to slay it, and then this little kid and the night they go and visit the dragon, and turns out the dragon doesn't really want to hurt anyone and just wants to drink tea and hang out. But then they have to put on this big show of the knight slaying the dragon, and then I don't know, like converting it to Christianity or something like that. I'm pretty sure that was a caveat of like helping them. The knight helping them was that the whole town had to convert. But that parallels with the Iron Giant or Lilo and Stitch, even, or like the character of Hagrid and having all of these pet monsters that he did. And I think it'd be cool to like explore, I don't know if it leans more into psychology, but like that interest from humans to, kind of maybe bond with those threatening forces or make peace with them, understand them a little bit better. And yeah, I don't know. I think that could be fun to explore.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. It makes me think of Marvel did a werewolf short movie. Did you ever see that? It was a couple years ago.
No.
I'm not going to spoil it for you because it's really, really good, and it's kind of similar to what you're saying.
Okay. Werewolf by Night.
Werewolf by Night.
Nice. I'll write that down.
Yeah, and there's some interesting sort of crossover research between like psychoanalysis and folklore too.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like there has to be, considering the folklore comes out of human psychology, basically. It's like our perceptions of things and how we make reason out of things that we can't really explain.
Mm-hmm.
One question that I would just be curious about as a folklorist is like, what is one of the most challenging topics or undertakings that you've taken on in your career?
Do you mean like topics that I've researched or
just anything? Like,
yeah.
Like whether it was for school or for the channel or for another job.
Navigating through academia is difficult because it doesn't pay well, and it's the jobs are hard to come by. And so that's just, I think that most academics would give you that answer, especially while you're like going through a PhD. But I feel like that's not the
that's a great answer though, because that's exactly why, like, a lot of people ask me like, oh, would you ever go and study this stuff? And I'm like, unfortunately, there doesn't really seem like a point. Like
there's no reason for you to do it.
I would love to get more involved. Like, you've cited how many people that or have interacted with that are in this space, and it'd be cool to make connections that way. But it's like, and I know there are scholarships available, but in theory, I would just have to go into a lot of debt to make significantly less money and explain this stuff to far fewer people at a time. So,
well, the one good thing is that you can hopefully not have to pay for school if you're doing that's one thing that I tell people, don't pay for a humanities higher education.
Yeah.
So most people do get scholarships and fellowships and stuff like that to pursue it. So that's something good for people to know.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Steven's doing Pacifica, which I think he is having to pay for that, but
brutal.
That's a sick program that he's in now. But let me think. So the hardest research project, I've had a lot of them. I'm currently working on a piece about the dark humor of nuclear disasters, which is a little bit outside of my sort of expertise. I'm co-writing it with Dr. Jim Deutsch, who was formerly at the Smithsonian, and I had done an internship with him there.
Okay.
And I did that research for him while I was there, and we decided to compile it into, a manuscript. And it's just been kind of challenging. Like it's a difficult topic to sort of navigate through.
Totally.
The dark humor of disaster. And it's just, I do try and broaden myself beyond just writing about monsters and cryptids. Like I have a lot of other, things that I'm working on and that I've done as a scholar, but that's kind of my wheelhouse. I'm very comfortable there. I've,
Yeah.
I've, I've struggled with getting that sort of research down as far as you become very familiar with the academic conversations that are at place. So like I know legend scholarship, I've got it down, but
Yeah.
humor scholarship is a different thing.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
it's not familiar with me.
Yeah. Yeah, that yeah, you're expanding outward into new territory. That is always like super intimidating for me as well with just covering topics.
Yeah. And then I'll say, I mean, my sort of like my burden to bear is how what is the optimal way for me to like make content
Mm.
on this type of stuff too, and so like anytime that I've tried to do a Jon Solo style video
Yeah.
in which I'm writing a whole script and I'm filming it and I'm editing it, and I find myself spending like 30 I spent like 30 hours on a video about the folklore and mythology of caves, and it got like 60 views,
Oh my
and I
god.
was like, this is so demoralizing.
Dude, yeah. What send me a link to that. Is that on YouTube or
It is on YouTube, yeah.
okay.
um and so I found myself more comfortable with, again, doing short form content because
Mhm.
it takes less time and I just get more views with it. I don't get to go into the depth,
Right.
because honestly I would trade, like, if I could be doing your job, and I know that you like work like crazy and everything,
Yeah.
but it is an appealing,
Oh, totally.
position, you know?
Yeah. No, I feel like, and in some ways I'm intimidated to by the world of academia and like having other academics on a little bit, but I also kind of feel like I almost owe it to the subject and topic to um to just there's so many people doing great work, and you've listed half a dozen of them in this video that just can completely radically change someone's understanding of the world around them, depending on what the subject is. And it would just be so great to bring more eyes to those people. And, because like you said, you bust your ass on making some content, and then 60 people see it. And it's not like you're doing it for the money, but it's like when 60 people see it. I mean, how many people do you have in an actual like class that you teach?
20 to 30
20 to 30. So
usually.
yeah, it's like if all of your, and that's not nothing, like that's still 60 people, but
Right.
it is not as exciting. And it's harder to get hyped about that.
Yeah. And I'll say this too, academics get a really bad rap.
Mm.
Like, I mean, the way that I think people talk about academics in the larger like culture is totally not fitting with what my experience has been. Like,
Okay.
sure, you get a few people that are just, not the most pleasant, but in general, like academics, I've found to be very, very like receptive and responsive people who are totally willing to share their knowledge, and like
Right.
that they really, really want to go on to podcasts, I think, and talk about their research
Okay.
and to share it. And so a lot of times it can be all bark no bite,
Right.
but I mean, for me, like every day when I'm going in to teach, I mean, I teach at CU Boulder. It's one of the most beautiful campuses in the entire country. And even when I go to Front Range Community College, like knowing just how like engaged the students are going to be, and
Right.
just the excitement of like, all right, today I'm going in to talk about yokai, or I'm going in to talk about King Arthur or something like that. That's like what invigorates me and keep like just,
Yeah.
I'm not cut out for the corporate world.
No,
Like
I
I'm
feel
just
you.
not. But I mean, I teach a film class too. And like, I had a moment where I was driving to class and I was literally like, all right, we're watching Lord of the Rings today.
Yeah. That's
You
sick,
know,
dude.
what else can I ask for? Like, this is good.
Right.
Great.
Like you found a way to provide a living for yourself by talking about and exploring the things that you love, which is like at its core, like is what it's all about, right? Like I'm lucky that this was my avenue. If I had found out sooner that I could study things like in the way that you are, maybe I would have taken a different path. I've always been discouraged, very discouraged from, I know there's scholarships, but at the time I would have thought that I would just have to take on another 30 to 60 grand of debt just to do something like that. But, yeah. And I think that I probably am basing my intimidation comes from, I just think some outdated impressions that I've gotten from academics. Like the world has changed a lot, especially after COVID. Like people don't think of podcasts as, as unprofessional and rogue as they used to. So you'll have to connect me with a few people that would be interested in coming on because it'd be so much fun. And I know
Yeah,
that
I definitely do that too.
yeah, we've got this community that it's like, it's one of those things where it's just like, you don't know until you know. Like they don't know all of the layers. And like, I still don't. Like all of the different avenues, the food ways is like something I've never even heard of, but that we just need to put some spotlight on that.
That's what I think too. I mean, the thing that differentiates you from the typical academic is that you have a huge following. You have and you've obviously worked years and years and years to build that up.
Right. But
but it's just something that like pretty unless you're an academic on YouTube like Jackson Crawford or something like that, it's just not really an option.
Right. And it's like, it is brutal. Like I love Jackson Crawford's content, but it sucks seeing like, I can use his videos and his books as like my primary resource. And it's really just, it's the presentation and more specifically the packaging of the presentation that is what attracts the eyes. I think it would, if I was a like professional academic and had this, that would be, I think, the best of both worlds because
yes, absolutely.
There's not going to be like, as like, he gets asked to go on IGN and point out all of the flaws with the God of War Ragnarok. And like, I'm not going to be asked to do that, even though that is literally my fucking job. Nobody's going to ask me to do that because they can't title it, professional folklorist points out all of this. Like they could, but I think the general public is like, they would see me as a content creator versus a folklorist. And I'm even torn in both camps, like myself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the CV and, the doctor or in my case, the MA, does hold some weight to it, so.
Exactly. Yeah. If I could just get that doctorate, that's all I need, but I don't have, how long have you been in your doctorate program?
I've been in it for 3 years.
Oh, wow. And then your master's was how long?
My master's was 2 years. Hopefully I'll finish my doctorate next year.
Okay.
Wow. Most people take a lot, it actually typically takes 7 years to finish PhD.
No way.
That's not going to be me. I'm going to wrap it up. Hopefully this summer I'll get some good work on my dissertation. But yeah, hopefully this next year I'll finish it up.
I hope so, man. Yeah, just put a bow on it and
just wrap it all up.
And then what do you think, what's your goal after? Like, I'm assuming you're still going to be teaching. Is that priority number one?
Yeah, that's priority number one. Luckily I'm in at two schools right now, and I mean I'm gonna pursue a full-time faculty position, but I've decided that I'm living in Colorado. I'm not moving out again. It's been such a crazy moving to Pennsylvania and Utah.
Yeah.
And I just like it here more. So I'm trying to thread a pretty tight needle in having this. I kind of feel like Doctor Strange in, there's one outcome
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that's what I'm gonna be working towards.
Okay. Yeah, and Colorado is such a, I mean, Pennsylvania and Utah are great too, but Colorado is such a fantastic place for folklore. You know, those mountainous regions where there's a lot of beautiful landscapes and a giant glacier didn't come through and flatten everything like it did here.
It really is, and so yeah, I mean, everybody watching, buy my book. I only need to sell 500 million copies to be the most successful author of all time. But yes, Colorado is a great place for folklore. And
Yeah,
so,
dude, that'll be the spark. I had one stupid question. It's like,
all right.
is there a moth lady?
Well, I was actually thinking about that when earlier in the conversation you said something about just like this guy, or I think when we were talking about Bigfoot, I thought about like, okay, how if Mothman is real again, like we need a breeding population,
Right.
right? So like, if
Exactly.
Mothman is an ultra terrestrial, maybe not.
Yeah.
But if Mothman is a flesh and blood creature, you would assume that there would be uh, a moth lady.
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah. So one thing is that most of the sightings, at least all the sightings of Mothman that I've read,
Mhm.
is a singular sighting.
Okay.
Like there's only one moth creature being sighted.
Right. Right.
And there's really nothing to distinguish it as being a man or a woman. It's just like that was the name that was given it to it through the popular press.
Right.
And so that's what we know it as. But yeah, to my knowledge, we don't really have a moth lady.
I've got some relatives who'd be great candidates, I think. That's why I ask.
Oh, that's funny.
Like I think I know a few interdimensional beings who could who could work.
I think I do too. None of my family members, I don't want to throw them under the bus, but I definitely, yeah, know some moth ladies for sure, I would say.
Yeah, we won't get too specific.
Yeah,
Actually,
no.
speaking of, I probably my last question would be, and I actually intended on asking it like way earlier, but what is the reaction that you get from people when you tell them what you do for a living? Like I mean, maybe you say like I'm a professor, but like when you tell them about your field of study and everything that comes with that.
It's overwhelmingly a positive response.
Hell yeah.
I definitely do get some like ego boosts.
Mm,
Um, some people I don't think get it. It's usually like the super corporate type
mm-hmm.
that have been brainwashed into like a certain way of thinking,
Yeah.
don't appreciate it. But typically people are like, wow, that is so cool. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Right.
This is again an ego thing. I had 2 people recently call me the most interesting man in the world. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just, if that's the
I love that
title people want to give me, I'll accept it.
Yeah.
But yeah, but no, it's overwhelmingly people are like, I didn't know that you could do that. I love folklore.
Yeah.
I'm so interested. Like, tell me more. And so I just hope that people know, because we do need more folklorists.
Mm-hmm.
We need more folklorists in academia. We need more folklorists on YouTube and making content.
Right.
We need more public folklorists. It's an avenue to explore, and the more that people do that, the more opportunities there's going to be. It's just going to expand the possibilities for everyone, I think. So,
Yeah.
I think that probably the number one response is, that's so interesting. Tell me more. I wish that I knew that was a possibility.
That's so cool. I love hearing that. Yeah, I like, because whenever I tell people what I do, they're fixated mostly on the fact that it's YouTube. And the the 2 questions I get are, how many subscribers do you have? And how do you actually make money on YouTube? I'm like, explain this again. But and then like a lot of the time I feel like I have to connect it to like something like pop culture for them to totally understand it. And I mean, that's my whole thing anyway. But, yeah, I was just curious because it's such an interesting field of study. It's ubiquitous and affects everybody, whether they realize it or not. All of our, especially as children, folklore has such a huge influence on the way that we perceive the world. And like nursery rhymes comes to mind too. It's a little bit different, but I don't remember the first time that I heard any nursery rhyme basically at all. So it's like, but they do become your, I don't know, there's something going on in the brain. It's like, when you draw, it's like you're reading a book and the author describes like a house, and they don't go into a lot of detail. They're like, the character enters the house, and then you picture that in your head. And it's like, what is the house that you always picture when you are reading books? And I don't know. I feel like there's that's where folklore, I guess, comes into play, is what I'm trying to say, is like, in, like I said, that Sandman book that I read as a kid, like, gave me the impression of who the Sandman is. And yeah, what you're allowed to do is tell people things they never knew about stuff that they loved or stuff that had a huge impact on them, whether they realized it or not. And it's just such a rewarding experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see where people ask when you tell them that you do YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, what do you really mean by that? And you're
Right.
like, I'm actually super legit.
Yeah.
Like,
that's the thing too, is like,
don't worry about
I
that.
never ever, I feel almost like it comes across as rude, but I never ask people what they do for a living, because I don't want to be like, well, I do YouTube.
I'm a YouTuber.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that's cool. You work in marketing? Well,
Right. And I'm like, they're always impressed at the number, but it also just feels a little braggadocious at this point. It's like, I don't really care about the number. At this point in my career, it's not making a big difference. I have 1.8 million subscribers. I don't get 1.8 million views on every video. Like, it feels cool to be that established in this space, but it's just it's like a vanity number, it's all related to ego and stuff.
well, I toss it out when I tell people that I research for you.
Hell yeah.
I'm like, I'm a researcher for a YouTube channel.
Nice.
It's got a lot of subscribers. I'm not just,
Right. It's like, there used to be guys at college, a couple of dudes who were rappers, and everybody knew they were rappers. And it's a different business. That's fine. But no one knew I did YouTube. I told 0 people that I did YouTube. The only reason word ever got out is because, like, a girl from my hometown went to college and then told people that I was doing that. But in my head, it was just like, people who talk about this all the time are not the ones who make it in the end. And
you have to do your work in silence.
Exactly. Right.
You can reap the benefits of the success when it happens, but it's like a huge trap to, start hyping yourself up before.
Right.
You.
Yeah, you got to be honest about your position in what you're doing, and it's not like I wanted those guys to do poorly, but I was just like, you talk about being a rapper more than you rap, like so just take that energy and reorient it towards the actual craft, and maybe you'll make it.
Yeah, and I'm willing to guess probably what happened to the rappers.
Yeah, you can guess.
But
they went on to be known as Post Malone, and no,
oh, of course.
Yeah, no, never fucking. I don't even know their names anymore. But I think that is probably a solid note to wrap this up on. Where can people find you? What are your social handles?
Yeah, so I'm at the Folklore on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube as well.
Oh, nice.
I'm still sort of navigating what the YouTube is going to look like for me, but I'm posting some of my shorts or my TikToks onto YouTube.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely, I would say TikTok and Instagram at the Folklore. Like I said, book is available on Amazon. Comes out June 24th. You can pre-order it now. Yeah, and you can actually find my Mothman article is open access. So if you look up Jack Daly Mothman, it's going to be one of the first results that comes through.
Okay, yeah, we'll put that up on screen and put a link to that in the description as well. Well, dude, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me for about 2 hours. I had a feeling it was going to go long because we always end up having good conversations, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for having me on. As always, great to talk with you.
Hell yeah, man.
Looking forward to our future projects.
Yeah, we got a lot of them. I got a lot to actually talk about you with too. But I'll do that when I'm not recording it for the public.
Yep.
Hell yeah. Well, awesome, Jack. Thanks again, man.
Thanks, man. Have a good one.
You too. Not bad for a first episode. Wouldn't you agree, Gunther? I felt like we covered some pretty interesting ground, but feel free to let me know otherwise in a long-winded, poorly written comment. Also, if you have any ideas for other potential guests, people I could have interesting conversations with, let me know in a comment. I've got our next 2 guests lined up, content creators like myself, but I'm open to any and all suggestions. Once again, I want to thank Jack Daly for joining me. The links to his social medias and his upcoming book are all in the description below, so be sure to check him out if you want to learn more history and folklore from a certified expert. And thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. Go to squarespace.com/Jon Solo to try them out for free, and then use code Jon Solo for 10% off your first purchase. I'll see you all again next week with a deep dive into the Chinese zodiac. Until then, my name is Jon Solo, and remember, Jon shot first.